They say that travel is supposed to make you wiser, and I have a theory on why that might be the case. If you've ever read the works of Daniel Kahneman, he's the man that wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow. That was based on a Nobel Peace Prize winning paper on the same subject. And one of the things that he talks about in that subject is this idea that humans are designed to recognize change and contrast. So, for example, if you were to put two blue shirts next to each other with slightly different shades, the chances of you being able to recognize the differences between those two shirts is going to be a lot less than if you placed a black t-shirt next to a white t-shirt. We can see the contrast in that. He actually gives very specific examples of, like, if you were to put your hand in a bucket of water that's at room temperature, then take it out and put it in a bucket of water that's a little bit warmer, it will actually feel quite hot. And that's because of the change in temperature between the two buckets of water, rather than the fact that the other bucket of water in itself is very hot. So you could actually go from a bucket of water that's cold to another bucket that's at room temperature, and the one at room temperature will feel warm. It's that change. It's that contrast. So we're really talking about perspectives here, physically, physiologically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. It's when we see a shift, something that gives us contrast, and then we have a shift in perspective. That's what teaches us something. That's what gives us wisdom, I think. I think that's what the purpose of that paper is. I think that's what it's really highlighting, part of that paper anyway, because he discusses a few topics in there. And I think that's what travel was supposed to be doing. That's what travel used to do for us. You know, you would go from one country, let's say you're in the city of London 100 years ago, and they've got cars that are being driven around, they've got tall buildings, everybody's wearing suits, shirts and ties. It's a built-up landscape, and you've now got retail shops, and you've got distribution, and you've got this kind of very urban, cosmopolitan landscape. And then you jump on a ship and you go across to a less economically developed country. And when you end up there, it's a completely different life. It's a farm life. You get your milk straight from the cow. It doesn't come in a bottle. Maybe you see the chicken whose eggs you eat. You know, everybody's living in huts. You don't have a shower, but you go to a well and, you know, you pull a tap, and that's how you basically rinse yourself. And because of that, the culture is also very different as well. The way people come together and the way people go about their daily lives. It's not just a change in language, it's a complete change in culture and their thoughts and ideas about what the purpose of life is, how one should attract a spouse, how one should earn, what good moral behavior is, what is good human behavior, what is joy. You know, all these things would be very, very different. But the lives that we lead now, 100 years later, when you go to another country, the issue that we have now is that the culture that is in other countries is actually largely the same of where we've actually come from, because the corporations have taken over. So now if you jump from London and you go to, say, Kuala Lumpur or UAE, you still have shopping malls there. You have McDonald's, you have Starbucks. Everybody goes to work. Everybody jumps into an Uber to get to work. Everybody's on their mobile phone. We're all using the same phones, iPhones and Android. It's become a monoculture. The only thing that really changes now when you jump on a plane and go to another country is the GPS coordinates. But that's all that really changes. The weather changes a little bit. The language changes a little bit. But the culture now is largely the same if you think about it. We're actually dealing with monocultures all around the world because the culture that's being given to us is actually being driven by the corporations. So everywhere you go, people have heard of Netflix and are watching Netflix. Everywhere you go, people are eating the same food, McDonald's. Everywhere you go, people are working for largely the same companies. And even if it's a different company, they're working mostly the same way. All the banks around the world are working largely in the same way. The oil companies, even though travel has become a lot easier, the technology for that has improved so much. So we're traveling more, but we're experiencing largely the same culture wherever we go. We're consuming the same information. The BBC, CNN, Fox News, these are spread out all over the world. Reuters, Al Jazeera. So we're actually consuming the same information wherever we go. Even if the politics or the information that's local to that particular country, that's been exported out to the rest of the world. The information that's been given to the local citizens is largely similar to what's being given to the rest of us. There are a few exceptions to that. China, for example, which is kind of a closed circuit and is a nation unto itself, which I think is a really good thing, because then at least they have a difference in culture. But the point I'm making here is that if there isn't a difference in culture now, when we jump on a plane and go to another country, really we're only going now to another country because we've got a little bit of trade to do, or we just want a break from work, we just want to have a holiday, then really all you're doing is just taking a break from work and getting as far away from work as you can. But the culture that you're experiencing to the new place that you go to is largely the same. You're still going to the water parks and you're still going on the beach. You're still staying in hotel rooms. In many other countries, the experience is going to be very similar. What would create a shift in perspective, or what would introduce you to different culture, would be getting to know the locals and understanding their thoughts and ideas. But even that is limited because what they're consuming is largely the same as what we're consuming. There are some differences, but not many as compared to 100 or 200 years ago, or much more than before. Like, you could go from somewhere like China to America a couple of 100 years ago, and it would be a huge contrast. It would be a complete contrast in terms of thoughts and ideas, the way people earn their keep, everything, the way people study, everything would be very different. Now, lives are very, very similar in the way that our lives operate. They're very, very similar. So I don't think we're getting any wiser from travel anymore, because there is no shift in contrast. There's no shift in perspective. I don't think that's happening anymore. In terms of what travel was supposed to do for us, I think now, really, if we want to make ourselves wiser, I think we really have to spend more time getting to know other people, like really getting to understand them. People have so many stories that they carry with them. They have so many experiences. And the problem is that everything that's been given to us is coming all from the corporations, all coming from singular sources. So we're all kind of being fed on the same diet of life, so to speak. But individual people have very acute experiences of their own. They have problems in their marriages, they've had problems in their dating lives, they've had problems at work, they've had problems with their health. And they've got experiences, things that they've learned for themselves, little tiny wisdoms, little tiny experiences. But that bonding isn't taking place. We're not going abroad to another country and getting to know the people there, because the corporations are taking up our time and the corporations are giving us our entertainment. We're in the hotel rooms and watching the TV, and we're out at the water park and spending time at the water park, and then we're in the shopping malls, and then we're at the restaurants. We're not really getting to know the local people and really understanding them and getting to know their way of lives. We're not doing any of that. That's what would have taken place a couple of 100 years ago. You would get to know the locals. They would be the ones that would receive you and accommodate you, and that is what would teach you something about their lives, and that is what would create the shift in perspective. We now have greater bonds with corporations than we have with each other. We're not really bonding with other people. They say that spouses actually have more familiarity with their work colleagues than they have with their spouses. If you think about the amount of time that somebody spends at work compared to how much time they spend with their spouse, they actually spend more time at work than they do with their spouse. We need to get to this point where we can start actually getting to know each other and taking wisdom from each other. I think that's what's going to create a real shift in our perspectives. And we need to start breaking away from corporations for our information, for our entertainment, for our education, and for our knowledge. We need to go back to relying on each other, I think. I think travel could have made you wiser, and as sentimental and as romantic and as cliched as this might sound, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I think we need to learn to travel into people's hearts and into people's souls. Right? I'm not trying to be all airy-fairy and romantic when I say that, but I think that kind of a travel is going to give us greater perspective on life than the physical travel that we've now all become accustomed to.